As a parent, one of my favorite things is spending quality time with my daughters. And whenever we come together, we talk a lot. Like, we discuss a variety of topics. They can range from love to our African culture. And there are times when these discussions become quite heated. And this last Christmas, we had one of these heated discussions. We were talking about our African culture, the expectations of our African culture, the traditions, and how sometimes these expectations from our culture clash with Gen Z and millennials, especially looking at their struggles living abroad. And what came out of that discussion was the fact that as a parent living abroad, there's a balance that we need to have, especially when it comes to preserving our culture and raising kids in a different environment. So today I want to discuss the challenges, the changes, and the lessons that I've learned raising a Gen Z child in the UK. So yeah, if you've got a child, then by all means, feel free to share some of your experiences. Now, I want to start by comparing my childhood, how I was raised as an African child in Zimbabwe, to the expectations nowadays and my experience as a parent raising children in the UK. So when I was growing up, the expectation was strict obedience. You were expected as a child growing up in that African household, you were expected to have strict obedience, because questioning your parents, like why they're asking you to do certain things, why they're saying this, challenging them, was seen as a sign of disrespect, like you couldn't do that. And this is embedded in our culture. This is one of those things, when I talk about our culture as Zimbabweans, as Africans, respect is one of those fundamental things that we're expected to do. And respect is a good thing. I'm going to come to that, but I'm just giving you the comparisons. As I was saying, when I grew up in Zimbabwe, respecting your parents meant complete compliance and fulfilling their demands. I'm not talking about extreme examples here, but I'm talking about a situation where your parents ask you to do something. You were expected to comply. You were expected to carry out their wishes, not to question why they're asking you to do that. And another thing as well, at the time when I was growing up in Zimbabwe, tough love was the norm. You were expected to just get on with things, no complaining. Yes, life was tough sometimes, but guess what? Life is hard all around. Just get on with things. You know, that was like the norm at the time. Now coming to the present generation, raising a Gen Z child living abroad, living in the UK, I've realized that this generation prefers open dialogue. Like, if you tell them to do some things, or if you tell them something about your culture, about what you expect from them, they want you to explain why you have those expectations, why you're asking them to do certain things, why you practice this tradition as Africans. They want that dialogue. Conversation is paramount. This is what I've discovered. And I've also discovered, because back in the day when I was growing up, corporal punishment was normal. I mean, it's a culture thing. In the African culture, I mean, we don't spare the rod and spoil the child. We don't do that. So if you got things wrong, or if you made a mistake, if the mistake was that serious, if you were wrong, that is, then there are times when you got punished for it. You got a slap, you got a beating, depending on the severity of the crime. So talking from experience as a mom raising kids in the UK, what I've realized is that this generation is, I would say, a sensitive generation. They've got their sensitivity, and as a parent, you need to be aware of those sensitivities and you need to tread carefully. As a parent, sometimes you need to take a softer approach, considering their emotional needs. Of course, as a parent, there are times when you absolutely need to be firm with your kids. I mean, sometimes you can't compromise, because you realize that not taking a firm stance sometimes is you failing your children. So as a parent, the way I see it, it's about balance, knowing when to pick your fights. There are times when I let things go. I let things go, especially when I know that, it's not a big deal. I let things go for a reason, especially when I know that they're going to be safe or they are not going to come to any harm. I let things go because I want them to learn the hard way. I don't tell them, I only point it out when they then come back to me saying, oh, you know what, this is what happened, I got into trouble, I don't know what to do, that is when I then teach them the lesson. So I pick my fights. The next thing I want to talk about, and this one is a major one, I might even say as well, it could be a bit sensitive because sometimes it depends on the circumstances, on the situation within the family. But I want to talk about it in the modern context. I'm talking about what African parents expect from their children versus what their children expect from their parents. Let me give an example. In some African families, the parents expect their children to look after them, to give them money the moment they start working. The past belief in the African context was that children should show gratitude to their parents for raising them. So how they do that is by providing for them, giving them money when they start working, buying them things. Now, this depends, the way I look at things, this depends on the situation, on circumstances. This is why I said this could be sensitive. Now, to give an example, let's look at a family where the parents of the child who has started working don't have anything, like they are struggling to put food on the table. Yes, the parent is trying their best, but guess what? Life is also proving to be difficult. In such a situation, it is reasonable, according to my opinion, it is reasonable to expect the child to help out. Now, let's look at another example. An example where the parents are working, they can fend for themselves, they've got money coming in. According to my opinion, it is unreasonable to expect your child to give you money, to give you things, to buy you stuff. It is unreasonable. Of course, if the child wants to give their parents some money, it should be out of choice. It is their choice. My kids buy me stuff, and it is because they choose to. It shouldn't be an expectation from me that they should do that. So the second example that I gave you, expecting your children to give you money even though you can fend for yourself, is unfair. And what that does is also, it creates this cycle of generational poverty, because instead of that child saving their money towards maybe a mortgage, buying themselves a car, or doing something with their money, that money is going somewhere else. It is being spent by their parents, who quite frankly don't even need it. Because when is that child going to start building their wealth, investing their money, if all parents do is take, take, take? Studies have also shown that generational wealth is key to breaking poverty cycles. It is key. As African parents or as African families, we must get to a point where we start breaking those generational poverty cycles. That cycle has to stop somewhere. We must start thinking in terms of long-term financial stability. I know this is hard to do because we have our traditions, things that we've been doing for generations. Because the Gen Z abroad is also now facing financial constraints. Some of the challenges mentioned in the article that I read include things like house affordability. According to the reports, nearly half of young adults in the UK cannot afford a home without the help of their parents or somebody. Another challenge as well that the Gen Z faces, according to the reports in the UK, is to do with job security. There's now high competition for those stable, high-paying jobs. The competition is now stiff. Even for those who have got jobs, the wages, while there's a rise in cost of living, housing prices and so on, the salaries are not moving along with that rise. There's still a problem there. So these are the challenges that the Gen Z is facing abroad. So for the Gen Z, balancing these cultural expectations with their own challenges is now a bit of a problem. Because yes, I'm not saying that the Gen Z doesn't want to observe our traditions. That's not what I'm saying. They do, but they are facing this challenge where they are having to balance the expectations with the challenges that they are dealing with. So as African parents living abroad, raising kids abroad, there is need for us to reassess and tailor these cultural expectations and traditions to our modern reality. I'm not saying that let us do away with our culture. You already know I'm big on our culture, but there is need to maintain that balance. For example, we can celebrate our Aurora tradition without making it or turning it into a financial burden. Let us celebrate it as a gesture as a way of honoring our traditions without, making a big fuss out of it. I don't know what you think about this. Let me know what you think. And also as well, what I would suggest is let us get into the habit of having that open dialogue with our children, taking the time to explain the why behind our culture. Because unless our kids understand exactly that why behind our culture, they won't respect it, they won't honor it, because they don't know why we are doing certain things. And they also need to understand that culture is what makes a person. Without culture, you are lost. Without culture, you have confusion. So we need to understand the need to observe that culture, not just impose it on them, because it doesn't work. What I've learned as a parent is that there is need to have patience, to have empathy, because we are explaining things that are somewhat foreign to them, because they're growing up in a completely different environment. Yes, they go back home during the holidays and things like that. They get to experience our culture, in the environment. But let us understand as well that they have this other culture that they are also a part of, a culture that is also important to them. Yeah, it becomes a little bit tricky if we approach things like we are imposing these traditions on our children. This is when we face resistance. And as a parent, that is not a good feeling. For me to talk about my culture and for my child to turn and say, I reject that. I don't care about that. I don't want to know. That is like the most painful thing for a parent. As a parent raising kids in the UK, I have learned to humble myself when I talk about my culture and my traditions. I have learned to have empathy, to support my kids emotionally, and to prioritize their mental health, because all these challenges that I mentioned impact their mental health. So I have learned to have compassion for them and to take a softer approach. Yes, as a parent, I have to make sure that I'm instilling discipline in my children, but I do it in a way that takes into consideration their challenges, their unique challenges as Gen Z living abroad, being raised by an African parent. So in conclusion, to recap everything that I've said, parenting Gen Z as an African mom abroad is about striking the right balance. It's about finding balance between preserving our culture while adapting to our modern day realities. That balance is crucial. And also we must remember that as parents, we are not just raising kids. We are building bridges between our cultures, traditions, and our future. So yeah, this is what I had for you in this video. As always, I don't know what you think about what I've said. If you've got any thoughts, if you want to contribute, then by all means feel free to do so. I'll see you in the next video. Take care.